that would be really great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Luzette, Jaimes. I'm happy to be here. I work with Ashoka, co-creative and co-collab, passionate about individual and collective well-being and how we integrate that into how we do systems, healthy systems that benefit all, how we integrate those in change-making work. I think that I'll pass it over, or do we start talking about the topic? Let me know.
I'll chat a wee bit about the topic and then I can take over from you.
All right. So we had a quite interesting conversation about well-being and equity. And I think that something that really I find important to name when talking about well-being is that it is multidimensional, and it depends on a kind of like different factors and how they interact with one another. And those factors include our basic human needs, whether they're fulfilled or not, and also other dimensions in which we show up as human beings, like mental, emotional, physical, and so on. And something that is really important to consider is that all of that happens in the systems that we are in. And some of those systems only benefit few and actually harm others. So well-being can only happen when we cultivate all of these different areas. Over to you, Callum.
So my name's Callum. I work for an organization called Habitus Collective. So we work with lots of different organizations, mainly in Canada, Europe, and the UK, to support them with community health and well-being projects, and with a measurement around whether or not their organizations and their programs are improving people's well-being. I've been obsessed with mental health basically my whole career. I tried other things, but it always seems to come back down to wellness and mental health because it's just so interesting. So a bit about this topic, and I probably do not speak as well as Luzette in any way, but the reason I'm so excited about sharing today is because of, I think, how systemically we undervalue networks and connections in people's mental health. So we know that we die if we don't eat, if we don't drink, if we don't eat, drink. But what we don't know that we die of as well is a lack of connection. An extreme example is torture is putting someone in solitary confinement and not being able to connect with anyone else. And it's something that I seem to forget so quickly when we're thinking about people's well-beings. It is part of being human, is to connect, and we don't often measure or look at how necessary those networks and connections are for our own well-being, to be included, to be a part of something. So that's kind of what I hold, and I think how I would like to kind of start off our conversations today is, as an evaluator, I often use the term with organizations, measure what you treasure and measure only what you treasure. And what I am really excited about today is if we start to actually treasure the well-being that comes with networks, and we measure those pieces, that we are probably starting from a really great place. And I will pass it on to Karima.
Thank you, Callum. Thank you, Luzette. My name is Karima Kadaoui. I'm talking to you right now from Tangier, Morocco. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a facilitator and co-founder and executive president of Tamkeen, Community Foundation for Human Development. Tamkeen approach is very much encompassed in the word Tamkeen, that brings in resonance a semantic field that talks about human potential, the possible, the potentiality, the possibility, but also the safe place. Mekan Mekin is a word in Arabic. And the Mekan Mekin is a safe place that is love nurturing and is nurtured by love. And it's very much with our different partners, and we call them our partners in flourishing, that we co-create the Mekan Mekin for the expression of our humanity. And this is where I really connect to what you said, Callum, and also Luzette. We connect to our humanity, we recognize in each other that humanity, and by being able to express it, learn to express it, our communities become that McKen, our structures, our schools become that McKen, rather than the dehumanizing context of our unfolding lives. So I'm very excited to continue this conversation with you all.
Thanks, Karima. I think I'll then just jump in. A good evening, everyone, or evening here in Central Europe. My name is Jan, and I'm part of the inHive team. And what I would like to maybe build on what everyone was saying is that at inHive, as you would have heard from Yusra's introduction, we are thinking about networks for young people. And I think one of the challenges that we have thought about very hard is inclusion of young people in spaces where they're often excluded, but thinking about networks as places where they feel that they belong, and how we need to be very intentional of creating those spaces. I think a lot of the times when we think about or when we approach people about networks for young people, we don't realize how much time and effort it takes to create those spaces where that inclusion is experienced. But at the same time, I think we as network practitioners have to be able to balance both creating safe spaces for people who are marginalized, where you feel like you belong, which is your space, your community, your network, but at the same time being able to cross boundaries and go into dialogues across those divides and differences in order to create that systems change. And I think what is really lovely that is coming through everyone's talk so far is this idea of humanity. And I was reflecting on kind of the shared humanity that we all have across those different divides. And, you know, in some of our work, or even some of the research that I've done in the past with young people, is the kind of lack of information about other people's lived experiences that creates this barrier and not understanding that we do have this shared humanity. So I think as network practitioners, it is a challenging task, and I'm grateful for having this conversation, because we need to learn from one another about the techniques and the tools to create a space where people feel included and that they belong, but at the same time where we safely cross those boundaries so people can learn about the lived experiences of the other. So for example, for young people to think about, well, what was the life like of the older generation before we knew them as old people? You know, they have their own lived experiences. They were young ones, and they, you know, we share in this, but we often don't know about that. So I'm looking forward to exchanging some of these ideas of how, what are those tools and mechanisms of creating those spaces. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Debra Erenberg. I'm from the Cancer-Free Economy Network. We collaborate towards a world in which no one gets sick because of toxic chemicals in the places that they live, work, and play. And building on Jan's point about being intentional about setting up spaces for people to learn from each other as a first step for well-being, you know, our network brings together people from very different lived experiences. We have people living and working in environmental justice communities, people who work with impacted workers. We also have health professionals and people from more traditional mainstream policy and environmental organizations. And people came into our network both with a desire to collaborate towards larger goals than what they can do on their own, but also with a genuine curiosity about each other as people, about how and why they do the work that they do, and with a real desire to learn from each other. And so we've really tried to set up our network in a way that people feel like they're valued for the experience that they're bringing, for the perspective that they're bringing, and where they're also able to be their whole selves. And you know, you don't have to be okay and be business as usual all the time. You know, we start out by interacting as people before we move on to getting the job done.
I would just maybe come back to Debra's point, I think, in terms of you know, being able to have those honest conversations about that shared humanity. And I think especially working in some contexts where that humanity was historically denied, I think that's the big challenge, where, you know, you do have to recognize the histories that we bring together, you know, in these spaces. Because, you know, as I was mentioning, some of the work that I've done with young people, for example, in South Africa, you know, there is this discourse in the country about you know, this born-free generation, this kind of you know, with that you know, the hope that the term was supposed to bestow, you know, is understandable, that kind of after the end of apartheid, you know, that we wouldn't have necessarily kind of the lived experience of that struggle, but that history and the system kind of continues. And I think that was a system which denied people humanity. And so I think coming to that space, it's so important that we know that we share that, but historically there was so many instances where that was denied to people. And kind of going back to Luzette's point about the system, that we have to recognize that we are coming into these spaces within the system that was and continues to be often broken. So I think that is really important for us to keep in mind that history that we bring as well.
Yeah, I love that comment, because it makes me think of so different kind of like polarities, right? That I think of, or we think of, when we're looking at well-being, particularly in networks. And it's kind of like, how do we do the individual and the collective, giving value to both? How do we value inner and outer without having to separate it, but really just recognizing the interdependence of all these different values that really complement one another? And how do we connect with the growth of all individuals and the collective, and also noticing that sometimes that growth comes out of pain and suffering? So how do we learn to process this together as well? And and I think that when thinking of well-being, looking at the intergenerational, Jan, like you mentioned, you know, the past, the intergenerational, that not only this generation has gone through certain oppressive systems, but it comes through our entire history. So how do we bring that awareness, and how do we work with each other to heal and forgive and grow together?
I was wondering if I could pick up on, I think it was your introduction as well, Jan, and I'm hoping it threads things together, but that a lot of our networks that we lead or are a part of, so if you're working with networks for young people, you're preparing them for a future, right? And sometimes you're preparing them for a harder world, because they may be leaders, and they may be kind of, you know, meeting with toxicity, meeting with systemic oppression. You know, they may be a leader in their field, but they're going to enter a world that may not be nice to them. So the idea that our networks can be there to kind of create that togetherness, but also be the thing that kind of fills that person up with wellness, spirit, and energy to face the challenges as they kind of go ahead. And as I say, I always jump back to the measures, but we definitely can know, and there are ways of looking at a network to see if it is adding to people or if it's taking away. And I would say, you know, so often we talk about kind of the self-care and safety, kind of, we have those conversations so much in mental health, but not really realizing kind of not every action takes away from your mental health. So many kind of add to them, and actually participation in our networks often can be adding so much to the strength that you need to kind of face that systemic oppression. So then I suppose what comes along with that, like you said, I think Debra, is like being very intentional and using different methods so that people feel included, because there are people in our networks that we're discluding, right? That's why they're a specific network. We always create eligibility for whether or not someone can participate, and that's because we all represent different types of people in the world, but that within who's eligible, that people can participate, they feel comfort, they feel ways that they can connect with others in the network. And I suppose the last piece, just because I know there's a few studies that speak to it so well, Luzette, that shared suffering in a way, and I don't want to be flippant or tokenistic about it, but shared jeopardy, shared struggle, it really does create the deepest sense of relationships and connections. And I can only speak personally. Some of my very best friends are the friends that I went through the hardest times of my life with.
I think that's right. I think that the way that a network responds to a difficult time can either create that shared sense or it can distance people. And this is something that I talked about when we were having our preparation call. You know, early in the pandemic, you know, we had members who were working 20-hour days, providing personal protective equipment and information to frontline workers and things like that. And they were showing up for our meetings exhausted and sick. You know, we had members who were so upset about police shootings and racialized violence that they didn't have mental bandwidth to think about policy strategy around toxic chemicals. And we had to just take a step back. And, you know, it's a simple thing. You know, we have always started our meetings with check-ins, but during certain times, we might spend a whole meeting just checking in and being a place where you don't have to be okay in a check-in. Like you can say, I'm really struggling today. And, you know, for us to have that space where people could feel supported and where they could bring the traumas that they were experiencing without feeling like get the business of figuring something out related to our shared work, I think was really valuable in terms of building those close relationships and trusting relationships that you're talking about. And you just can't force things to move forward when people are grappling with really big things that, you know, that we're sharing as humans together.
Thank you so much for that, Debra. I'm sorry, can I come in? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm just thank you. We're just yeah, actually, why don't you go ahead? I think we're going to be shortly going to the time where we'll invite the audience to share. And since we're a smaller group, I think it allows for opportunities like this. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Go ahead, no problem.
Yeah, name is Lindelwa. I am in South Africa. And thank you so much for hosting this. And a lot of the points that you've been raising, I kind of relate to, and we experience them in our network, especially in relation to people having difficulties sharing like their experiences, their pains and their traumas. It's actually been very challenging to just like come together and be a functional network, because there's a lot of distrust. And I guess just like, I think it's Jan who touched on the fact that, you know, South Africa with our apartheid history, when, you know, colonizers came through, they used the whole divide and conquer rule. And so there's still a lot of division amongst people. Like the focus of our organization is on indigenous well-being, and we work mostly with like traditional healers and leaders in the sector, like indigenous well-being sector. And because at some point, like the apartheid government outlawed traditional healing, it kind of went underground and people were practicing it in secrecy. And now with the democratic government, people are coming out, you know, and practicing openly. But still, you can't just go to any like mainstream institution and start talking about traditional healing. And the people that are actually leading in the sector and who are healers, they still are very fearful to come out, and there's still a lot of secrecy. So even with the networks, we come together and say, let's do this, but you still find that they still prefer to work in silos because it's safer like that. And of course, there are a whole lot of other issues, you know, in terms of like resources and also benefits of being part of the networks. Like, why would I want to be part of this network? I know it's about sharing my traumas and my sorrows, and also like understanding and learning the opportunities in the field. But what field, you know, because there's even that, there's no understanding of who they are and the role that they play, as much as the role is very significant, especially in indigenous communities. Like here in South Africa, about 80% of African people still consult with like traditional healers and Isangoma and all of that, but still the work itself, it's not being recognized, it's not recognized in institutions. So there's still that lack of like connection and community, even though it's such a big sector and so many people actually use it. So how do you even like start the process of getting people to start talking about their own experiences when they don't even want to talk about the way that they are doing, you know? So it's, yeah. Anyways, I just thought I should put that out there.
And that was really interesting. And I think maybe then I'll just, one of the things that sparked your comment in me was also this, when we think about like what can networks do, or what should we as network conveners do, I think there is something powerful what you were talking about, language, and how we actually allow people to express their wellness, well-being in different concepts. And it comes again to this kind of power and how we are in the system that Luzette was talking about, like how we're kind of conditioned to what we talk about and what we don't talk about. But also once we talk about well-being, there is this kind of, I guess, Western medical language that we apply. And I think there is something about creating spaces where people can draw on different ways of expressing themselves. It could be language, but it could be, you know, art. You know, there's other ways that there is some, I think sometimes we have these blinds on and we kind of think about, well, if we're talking about mental health, we talk about a certain way.
If I can share the network that I facilitate, so it's the International Peer Leadership Network, and it's a little bit like inHive. Habitus houses that organization, and what that is it's a network internationally of people with mental health issues or who use substances, who use those experiences to help others in the community with their own experiences. And you can imagine that with that such a variety of experience from around the world, and we have I would definitely say it's like it slants to English speaking countries, but what is really important about that, and I like how you said, we get very quickly clinical when we start to talk about wellness and trauma, and I would definitely say that it's not that we don't encourage disclosure, but it's not important for us as a network to strengthen our bonds with one another. And it's to say that, like, I think a lot of the time when we're talking about wellness and networks, we almost feel like we have to confess our background to prove ourselves, to say I deserve to be in this network and my mental health is intense enough, or my trauma is big enough for me to be a part of this network. And so that's one of our guiding principles, is that the idea of peer support in a network, or the idea of being together with one another, is that I trust that you know what it's like to be me and to have my experience. We can support each other without having to say a word. And I think that is often one of the fears, I think, traps we get caught in with our networks, is there's this sense that we have to provide each other with clinical therapy and awareness of trauma-informed care, when just being in the same space with one another, even if that's a virtual space, can be enough. And it works for our group. Yeah, sorry.
I'll share the story, going to what you just said, Callum, about supporting each other without saying a word. One of the neighborhood communities we have a partnership with now for over 10 years. This is a young man who had serious mental health issues, and who was very violent, and he actually stabbed several members in the community, including the mother of one of our team members. And what the community did then, they went and visited the members who got wounded, but they also visited the family of the young man who stabbed. And that was a beautiful expression and recognizing, yes, there is violence, but there is also love. And this is what we're hearing from the young people in the neighborhood, in the community. There is violence, but there is also love. And this is how you bring things together, in recognizing that, in being able to see that. And as that young man was taken into prison, and when he came back, there was a moment of panic. It was a moment of panic about, he was going up and down the streets, and there's this community house, and the facilitators were hesitating. So facilitators are from the neighborhood. They were hesitating. Do we open the community house? What are the risks? What might happen? And as some of the mothers were going by, they tell them, why isn't Dar Marifa, the house of recognizing, it's called, open? And they said, well, you know, this so-and-so is here now, he's back. And then the mother just say, come here, look out. What you see over there? Do you see the children going to school? And she said, yes. I said, look around on the left. Do you see the people going to buy the vegetables? And she said, yes. And then she turns around and said, do you see those children over there playing in the street? And she said, yes. He said, well, everything is continuing the same way. That he is a member of our community, and we have to accept him in our community. So that is an extraordinary form of rahma, of deep compassion, that we can, even in situations of deep violence and fear, when we come together, we can find that inner strength. To remind ourselves of the humanity of every single member of the community, even in extreme situations. There is one of the fathers of resilience, the concept, the psychological resilience concept, who was talking about resilience is a mesh, it's not a substance. We are not born with more or less resilience. It's something that we grow together, that we learn to weave. And I think it's here, I thought that was such a beautiful manifestation, an expression of the resilience of a community. But that resilience came from an expression of a deep humanity, of recognizing, even in extreme situations, that humanity that we share.
It really is like, if we are helping as a network, you know, we help each other remind ourselves of our potential, like in our interactions. And like, so Debra, you mentioned, you know, it really is how we react as networks around what happens that helps us, you know, either cultivate our well-being or not, right? And so when there are things that are really amazing, you know, how do we organize and recognize those things? And also when something is really hurt, how do we see that as the learning that we are going as a social field, as a body that goes beyond mind? Because we're all interconnected. There is this interdependence. So whatever is happening to that man there, it's also happening to me here. So it seems to me that networks, I see them as a very important element for our human evolution. How do we learn to learn together and to grow together and to get out of unnecessary suffering so we can really grow into more of our potential?
I think I want to bring equity more kind of front and center into this conversation, because I feel like equity is so connected to our sense of whether our well-being is being protected within a network. And in our network, because we're bringing together people from such different backgrounds, you know, for some people, the issue that we work on is their life, it's their family's survival. And for some people, it's their job. I mean, it's important to them. It's deeply important to them, but the stakes are different. And the experience of living it on a day-to-day basis is very different. And so we've really worked to, first of all, come to a common understanding of what equity means within our network and in terms of the external facing work that we do together. And one of the things that means is that we want the people who are the most directly impacted by the issue to be front and center as we decide what our priorities are, as we decide how our budget is divvied up and all of that. And that's been kind of a transition for us over time as we've gotten better at embodying that. And I think that that also really does contribute to people's sense of well-being within the network, because their lived experience is being respected. And we're also working to, you know, increase their capacity to be able to participate in the network.
Thanks, Debra. I was going to comment on, but I don't know if if we need to take a break, or can I continue with a quick comment?
I've just shared in chat that we would love if anyone wants to share anything, they can do that in chat, or just unmute yourselves and you can speak directly with the panelists. But I think in the meanwhile, Jan, I think you can go ahead, and then once you have some folks, we can just make space for them then.
Oh, I'm very happy to wait for people to jump in if anyone would like to. Yeah, of course.
You can share any reflections, anything that resonated with you, any comments or questions in chat. You're always welcome to do that. But if you feel like unmuting and just speaking out, you're welcome to do that as well.
I guess maybe while people are writing, or if there is lack of courage just yet, we don't bite, so please don't feel intimidated and do jump in. But I think one thing that actually was sparked, and I was actually reflecting on a little bit, Debra, as you were talking, and I'm also very grateful that you brought equity in here, because again, kind of just being embedded in the South African context, and when we talk about trust and relationship building, you know, there is that also very material side of things. And I think, Luzette, when you framed us in terms of the different levels and contexts, and like, you know, talking also about the physical, I think we do have to recognize also that kind of the material and the economic and the physical that does come into these conversations. So in the South African context, of course, the debate has always been that, you know, there was a lot of societal attempts to heal and to forgive. You know, you had that kind of, you know, truth and reconciliation process where the society was trying to go through this healing, but there wasn't as much effort being done, or in many people's opinion, it wasn't kind of the economic side of things weren't taken care of. And, you know, when you are not being able to meet your kind of bodily needs, you don't have the resources, you know, as much as you are being kind of going through this emotional healing and forgiveness, then there is that kind of lived experience that kind of, you know, stopping you maybe, or that there is a factor that we need to recognize. And I think it's a tricky one. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, or kind of any specifics, but I think, you know, when we are talking about the shared humanity, and, you know, sometimes when the basic material side of things aren't taken care of, and there isn't that justice also on that side of things, a lot of people are not able to build that trust and build those relationships and can't come to those conversations. And I don't know if anyone does have those experiences from your work where you know, and Debra, you made very powerful comments about, you know, sorry. Comments about, you know, budget allocations, and I think that is very much one of those manifestations. So I don't know if others have that experience, but I think it's an important one for sure.
I would, Debra mentioned earlier the fact of everyone feeling that they have that place. And there's something quite extraordinary and amazing that happens at that moment, where I'm recognized, I have my place, and I feel loved. And it can be expressed in so many different ways. That experience, we recognize it and we take it with us in different places and in different spaces. So what we're seeing today is what is experienced in one neighborhood is diffusing in other neighborhoods. when members of other neighborhoods come and say, well, we want to do what you do. And they say, well, we will share what we do, but you will do it your own way. And what we recognize is such an extraordinary altruism in human nature. Like if I experience something, when I deeply reconnect with myself, hence I recognize with the other, from and through and to this shared humanity. Well, it is something that you cannot keep to yourself. And we're seeing how the university students who are experiencing that are taking it to their neighborhoods. And from their neighborhoods, it is going into the schools. And from the schools, it's going to other spaces. And how this process, and we're also seeing, and which is really interesting, how these young people who experience this in one specific, in their school, their university, this the McKen, that love nurturing and nurtured space where we all have a place, where we grow a shared understanding of what does it mean to trust our humanity by experiencing it, which creates an extraordinary creativity and grows and even sometimes transcend the very understanding of resilience. Well, these young people just are looking for other places. So these barriers, as you were talking earlier, it's like these barriers start dissolving within faculties and universities and schools. And this is very much what we're calling a community-based learning and understanding ecosystems, where the very fabric of these interactions become the shape of this interaction. So it's no longer one community recognizing itself as a community or one network, but it basically becomes an ecosystem where it's a lived experience of loved and loving.
I love what you said, Karima, like, and it's the deep community building embedded approach to building a network. And I suppose working in the UK or in Canada, which is kind of deeply Western and deeply process orientated, and in so many ways they're trying to unprogram themselves from doing that. And I've seen those attempts over my career since I started my career, and I feel like that's the goal. But we have to be, and I feel like a couple of things that have helped me in my journey in being a network facilitator. I think number one is, it seems so simple and such a hot take at the moment, but recognizing your privilege. But I think that's easy enough said, but it's not easy enough done. So I'm paid to be here because I'm the facilitator, and I am the one who gets to spend my whole working day on this. You're the one who shows up kind of at the end. So I sometimes I think I'm the expert. And oh my God, have I gotten it so wrong a number of times where I've had to apologize, and I've had to learn and take off my expert hat. And then I suppose the second thing or example that I did want to share, and just because I work so deeply kind of in the mental health world, is I feel like there is a risk that we repeat the mistakes of the past at the moment in our paternalistic approach to charities, philanthropy, and helping the poor. That we're so worried about trauma and the risk of harm to the community that we are supporting and serving, that we treat people like children or pets, or like China, that they're not allowed to take any risks, because if they take any risks, it'll affect their mental health. And I've seen that so much, especially within the mental health and drug use world, that I just like what you said, Karima, because I just want to kind of say that like testament to so many of my partners in the community. Like, yeah, they shared something that was traumatic in their past, but they are a holistic individual with hundreds of experiences. I bet you bottom dollar that so many of those people have those experiences, but they're not going to share because they're terrified you're going to treat them like a child, like you treat everyone else like a child who's disclosing. So they're the things I've definitely learned from that.
This is making me think of, and it's so helpful, and it's making me think of how we do things in the network, right? Just so we can, as I said earlier, integrate the inner, the outer, the individual, the collective, and all that. And so from the Ashoka perspective, we're really into like how do we build structures that like really unleash everyone, like people know they are powerful and have agency and they matter, right? So how as facilitators we create those conditions and those kind of like engagement principles, so the way that we act works in that way. And then from the co-creative perspective, we will look into 4 different agendas when we're building networks. One that is connect, align, learn, and make together. And it's not about the what of those 4 things, but it's the how to. How do, for example, when we are inviting people into the network, we really look at all the parts of the system and we look at those who are not highly represented, and we have to create incentives for them to come there, not only just get an open invitation, but it's like, as you said, Callum, I'm paid, you know, the funder is paid to be there. But what happens with the single mother that needs the childcare, that, you know, that is at the center of the issue and should be on the table making decisions? So we really, thinking of equity, need to create support for everyone to be able to participate in a way that they have their agency and their voice matters.
Thanks, Luzette. Before I hand over to Lindelwa to share her comment or question, I just wanted to invite again anyone from the audience, if you have any specific story or anecdote or experience where you've seen or witnessed well-being or equity or shared humanity or all of these amazing things we're talking about, feel free to share. We'd love to hear from you, and we can also spend some time just waiting for. We're not afraid of silence. We want to make sure that we give spaces to people, because we're literally talking about how there's just not enough people at the table having these conversations. Over to you, Lindelwa, and maybe there's someone else later on from the audience who'd like to share as well.
Oh, all right. I just kind of wanted to reiterate what everyone else has been saying about people knowing and understanding that they have their own voice, and I mean that their voice matters. But the thing is, we already know that, especially for some of us who are from these communities, you know, and like when we try and form the networks that we're forming, it's because we understand what we have to offer. We know the importance of it all. Like all these things that you've been talking about, I mean, it's not really something new, in a sense that we don't know the importance of connecting with another, what it does to your well-being. I mean, in Africa, like one of our main principles is Ubuntu, which means umuntu umuntu ngabantu, you know, like you are who you are because of the other. It's humanity as loosely translated. But the thing is, the challenge, I guess, that we end up encountering is that because there's still that sense that we need to be kind of guided, or we need to have someone from outside to come in and be like our leader, so that, you know, our work could be legitimate or seen as credible, then we end up finding ourselves in spaces where we know who we are, we know our value, we know what we can offer, but we're just not given, you know, the space to do it. We're not given the support to do it. So, and of course, we understand that nobody just gives you stuff, but we're in the humanitarian sector. I mean, everything about the humanitarian sector is about giving to the next person, you know, we're all philanthropists. But for some reason, when it comes to like African initiated programs, networks, whatever, it's like there has to be like an expatriate, you know, someone from outside to come in and say, yes, this one is legitimate, so we can fund them, or yes, we can support them, we can listen to them, they know what they're talking about. But just in our own way, in our own spaces, and just doing things in our, like by ourselves, for ourselves, those kind of things don't really exist. It's like we don't have spaces to actually do that. So even when we try to get together, it's like, where is it going to take us at the end of the day? So we end up again dividing so that we can find spaces like these where we interact with people that have the funds or people that can allow us to have a voice in these spaces, and then we try and take them back, to our people, and we do it in our little silos again, which kind of defeats the point, because the whole point is for us to be able to build ourselves up as we are, because we understand the importance of being a community, of being like the people who are cohesive and coherent in their principles, in their nature, in their way of life, because that's how we grow as people. But our systems, again, like Jan was saying, they do not allow us to be able to do that. And I'm not just talking about people who are maybe illiterate or even just indigenous. Most of the indigenous healers that I work with, some of them have PhDs. I'm doing my PhD. Some of them are doctors, some of them are professors. These are like learned people. And of course, there are others that do not necessarily have like Western education, but they have like real like indigenous knowledge that is valuable to us. But because again, they come from these contexts and they have this background, then they're not recognized in certain spaces, and they can't be recognized as independent entities without the outsider coming in and saying, yes, okay, we credit you. You're worthy. You're worthy of our time. You're worthy of our funds. You're worthy of our attention, and we'll listen to you now, and we will support you now. So, peace.
Thanks for sharing. And sorry, before I just allow everyone to respond, I thought maybe we could hear from Alexandra first as well, just to make sure that we get a chance to hear from everyone. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Hello, thank you, Sra, and thank you for everyone for sharing with so much passion and authenticity what you consider to be important within the framework of networks, and really building those connections in a way that is conducive to more well-being and to unlocking potential and to healing and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to share a story, but I need to bounce off some of the questions that kind of, I allowed to come forth throughout the discussion. And the approach, the angle that I wish to take is the last question that I think Luzette asked, is the how. And I think it's the strongest and the most difficult, perhaps, question to really answer specifically, especially in abstract words and outside of context. But I really would love to have your thoughts on that. So whether we're focusing on the individual or we're focusing on the collective and on the co-creation part, there is an aspect of this coming together of different minds and perspectives that serves a certain purpose, a certain output, a certain outcome. There's something that has to emerge from that environment, from that ecosystem, from this coming together of individuals and stories. And so my question is how to make sure that this coming together of stories is actually going to contribute individually and collectively to something that is tangible, so that people who are joining this environment, who are joining this network, who are joining a session, whatever it is that they're joining, they're going to come out with something that they're going to take with them, and that is going to really influence them and impact them and perhaps contribute to a certain personal transformation. So my question is how?
Can I go? I think you connect your question, Alexandra, and what Lindelwa, is that how you say your name? I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. They're very connected, and I really appreciate a lot what you said, Lindelwa. I will just share maybe that initially in this process, we were thinking of what we were doing as the gardening and the creating conditions. And then very quickly we realized we're not creating conditions, very, very quickly. We are co-creating conditions, and we're co-creating conditions with the community members. They could be schools, faculties, neighborhoods, different types of communities. And then we realized that we're not the gardeners only, but we are also the garden. And that brings a humility and a reality to the whole process. We are here to grow a shared understanding together. What does it mean to trust our humanity? We don't know what will emerge, but we're going to experience a relationship, a deeply human relationship that will allow us to experience what a humanizing society can be. A society where the communities or the schools are the reflection of that humanity and not the humanizing context. So what we have experienced is our partners and flourishing, sharing with other partners, and the partners coming and asking the questions, and the different questions meet. And our questions are evolving and growing as our perception grows. So there's no longer the one who knows, there's no longer the one who has. Is together we are growing a shared understanding. So by experiencing that and expressing that and your embodied understanding, things become very, very simple. Actually, there's such an extraordinary simplicity to it. The moment you free yourself from thinking that you are doing anything, that we're actually experiencing a deep human relationship together, and we're growing a shared understanding that is embodied, deeply embodied. So that would be my in the how, Alexandra. It has a simplicity and a complexity to it.
I can go very quickly and just say, name it. So few networks actually name well-being and equity as one of their goals. And if you don't name it, you're not going to measure it, and you're not going to qualify your network as successful or not if you've not named them as outcomes of your network. When our networks are focused on youth development or career aspiration, it seems to be that that's the only way we measure it. And then the very last one is, I feel like the work is so relational. There are ways to accelerate deepened relationships, and it's through sharing and asking great questions, and I can share them at another time, or I think you can find and seek out those questions quite quickly. And so, like you said, it's that Karima put it so much better than I did, but creating the conditions for that to happen.
I don't want this conversation to end. I regret that we are now towards the end of the session. Thank you so much, everyone who shared. Thank you to our panelists for the dialogue, and really love that we ended with this sort of practical takeaway, next step, the one from Callum. As I mentioned before, we hope this is just the beginning, you know, especially when we think about topics or themes like equity, wellness, well-being. We know that we're not having enough conversations. I mean, we're really lucky that we had a smaller group today, so we could have an intimate discussion. But it's also a bit telling that we did have a huge group. You know, we've had some bigger groups in other sessions. So I think all of us are walking away today with, I think, not just important things or takeaway actions, reflections, but we also want to think about how we can channel these things into actual impact and transformative impact. We hope that you made some connections, collaborations, that please feel free to reach out to anyone that you sort of thought was inspiring you in this session. And we really hope, as I mentioned before, this is truly just the beginning. Before we sign off, I'd love it if everyone could just quickly unmute themselves and just say a quick goodbye. This is, I think, a best practice that I borrowed from my colleague Brendan. I think that works wonderfully. It's just great to hear from everyone. Sorry, we couldn't give everyone more space in this session, but we really hope that these are part of ongoing conversations and we all have a seat at the table. Thank you so much for joining. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Love and light to you all.
Thank you.